Hey everybody, we are live. It's Charlie here with my co-host Alex,
I'm Alex.
and we're paddling out through the sea of content online to find the best wisdom on the internet. What is today's video about, Alex?
Sort of about alternative education. Just trying to pinpoint some of the concepts that are out there about other ways that you can get educated.
Yeah, and I think this applies equally to people currently in school and people currently not in school. Learning is a lifelong thing, as the meme goes, and it's a skill that can be improved. And there are a lot of resources online, which we're going to get into. You can learn literally anything for free with like Harvard, MIT level instructors, or actual Harvard, MIT instructors. And yeah, so even if you're not a current student, if there's anything you want to learn, anything you want to find out about, let's dive in and show you how. So we're going to start with Saul Khan. He was the founder of Khan Academy, which kind of revolutionized how students engage with material. We'll get into kind of his novel concept of flipping the classroom and the homework assignments, but let's just hear his kind of high level
Yeah.
pitch. This is a video from Big Think. Shout out to them. All the links are below for the videos we're going to watch today. Let's hear from Mr. Khan.
Humanity is entering some type of new phase. Even something as light as YouTube, when you really think about it, it's going to go down in history with writing, the printing press, as a new phase. But at the same time, the current form of education is about 200 years old. Education is something that we just assume because we all grew up in it. Let's reimagine education. Let's imagine what schooling could and should look.
I'm interjecting early on, but I wanted to throw something in here. There's a book I read a while ago, and it's about what is it, Loyola Marymount? Which faith was it? It's a sect of Christianity that's basically responsible for creating a public school system in Europe. But the thing that's interesting about that idea was that before that happened, there wasn't really any formal education system whatsoever. Like really wealthy people essentially hired private tutors for their students, and obviously there's a massive grab bag in terms of the quality you're getting, and in terms of even continuity between the knowledge base of what was being taught. So like there was misinformation, there's contradictory information, gaps in knowledge, and then again, like only the wealthy people had access to education. And then I really wish I could. It's just popped in my head. I wish I could remember the name of the religious sect. Whatever. They basically were responsible single-handedly for creating an educational system. They sent their parishioners or priests out to develop these schools in the heart of Europe, and then pretty quickly it became really attractive to wealthy families. So much so that they would move to the center of cities to be near these schools and then have their kids be able to frequent these schools. So it's important to realize that was someone had to go out of their way and create that. Like even the idea of there being any sort of formal education system, and we didn't have anything to stand in for it before then. If you were poor, you basically just had whatever was available to your caste, like whatever vocational work in front of you or whatever people around you that knew things. Books were probably even really, really rare, and even reading literacy was really rare for most of human history. And then after that, if you did have some money, still there was a lot of questions about the quality of the resources in front of you. So this is a pretty modern. It's I don't know what I'm saying. It's pointing out that like be wowed a little bit at how impressive it is that we even have any education, and now be wowed at the idea of like it's not so crazy to think we could take another massive leap forward because the system we created didn't exist before anyway. For most of human history, that was a new convention. So now it's time for another new convention. Anyway.
Yeah, there are already people working on this, creating new kind of types of universities. Obviously, the online courses are a version of that. And I'm glad you mentioned YouTube because that's actually I wasn't thinking about that, but that's where we are right now, obviously, and it's usually the first place I go if I want to learn something. I don't enroll in a course or I don't go to a school. I go to YouTube and find 100 quality videos on,
Right.
from 10 minutes to 10 hours on how to do X. So yeah, there is unlimited, if you have a smartphone or a computer or an internet connection, there's like unlimited resources at your fingertips, which is like necessarily going to transform education. I think you're right. Like we're kind of in this transition period where, or as he mentioned, like we have all these new resources, but like the old ways are still kind of king. And, due to like legacy, just like legacy patterns in our society of like you need credentials, you need a degree from an accredited institution, and all that stuff is not set up to be part of the digital age. But like once we get
Right.
that figured out, and that you could take an online course for a couple years, pay 1/10 the cost of a university, get a degree, and then if employers respected that degree, like once we get to that stage, which I think is going to be within the next decade or two. um,
I think it's going to be. I mean, I think people from our generation or younger will naturally understand that because they're raised in the digital age. I think they kind of will respect that. I think there's a
yeah, I mean, I'm already seeing it actually now that you mention it. Like depending on the field you work in, like for someone like me who works in coding more or less, you don't need a degree if you can show off skills. I think this is happening in more and more domains. Like if you can just show a portfolio or show that you've written good code or that you've designed good things or that you've built something or built a business or done something, a lot of employers almost look higher on that than they do on a piece of paper that says you went to class every day for 4 years. So yeah, there's more and more emphasis, at least in my kind of the worlds that I interact with. There's more and more emphasis on what can you do, not what degrees do you have.
agreed. And by the way, the religious group I was trying to remember is the Jesuits, who have a pretty fascinating history. Actually, they were wildly exploratory and adventurous. They'd regularly send like one Jesuit just out into the world, like go map Asia. Like, okay, cool, and that's what I'm going to do for the next 30 years. And that's they created a lot of things around the world. Anyway,
Yeah,
let's continue.
there's still Jesuit schools to this day that are pretty well regarded. I mean, they're religious, Catholic, but they're still pretty well regarded. All right, let's continue with Mr. Khan.
Like, given the needs of the future and also the tools at our disposal with the internet, we can literally connect the world through learning. I think I've always been drawn to science fiction because it really does challenge you to think, how could the world be? When the whole Khan Academy thing started to happen, I think one of the unique things that to some degree allowed me and Khan Academy to have our own lane is that we started having more of this almost science fiction view. Hey, instead of Khan Academy just being a piece of software, a piece of content, could it be the next Oxford, the next Smithsonian? Could it help us elevate to another level so that the time we live in now feels like a dark ages in 100 years or 200 years?
This might not be the right time for it, but it just popped in my head. So even the traditional method, right, of lecture, essentially classroom lecture, it made sense for a very long time, because if you think about it, people with knowledge they were in the minority, and the people you had to go through an institution that had those books or had those learned people to bestow that knowledge to you, and that was the only route to get it. There was no other route. So it made perfect sense that you have somebody who knows what they're saying, stand in front of the classroom and disseminate. Now we don't need that anymore. People can get that information without relying on that one person and their filters from other resources. And then it raises the question of like, okay, since we don't need that, we can speed up that first phase of getting the conceptual content. How do we push people into like actionable spaces where they're actually playing with that content and applying that content, and minimize or appropriately recognize that schema of using lectures based teaching isn't really necessary anymore in the way it used to be.
Yeah, definitely.
My name is Sal Khan, and I'm the founder and CEO of both Khan Academy and Schoolhouse.world.
Take a moment and remember your favorite teacher. Now imagine that teacher could reach not 30 kids in a classroom, but millions of students all over the world. That's exactly what Sal Khan is doing on his website, Khan Academy.
Back in 2004, my family was visiting me in Boston, and my aunt told me that my cousin was having trouble in math. And when I asked Nadia what was going on, Nadia said, "I'm just not a math person." When someone says, "I'm not good at math," I immediately think they just haven't looked at it the right way, or their self-esteem has been shot because either they themselves have been telling themselves or other people have been telling them that they're not good at it. And what I've seen over and over again, it has nothing to do with innate ability. So for the next several months, Nadia was in New Orleans, I was in Boston, remotely tutoring her. And I had 5 virtual classrooms, which were essentially these digital scratch pads. I could tell Nadia, "Meet me in classroom 5." And what that meant is I could be in Boston, she was in New Orleans, but at classroom 5, we would hear each other's voices. And if one of us wrote with a digital pen, the other one would see it. We started making progress. She got caught up with her class. She frankly got a little ahead of her class. And by quirk of how my mind works, I am always thinking about, hey, this is working for my cousins. Could it work for 10 cousins? Hey, if it's working for them, could it work for people who aren't my cousins? Could it work for 10 million people? Could it work for 1 billion people? So in 2009, I quit my day job. I set it up as a not-for-profit with a mission of free world-class education for anyone, anywhere. A little delusional for a guy operating out of a walk-in closet at the time. And so in that early version of Khan Academy, I was imagining it would be a place where we can connect as human beings and learn from each other. Now, as Khan Academy grew, and now it's 120 million registered users, 20, 30 million come every month all over the world, we lost that person-to-person functionality, but it's always been in the back of my mind. And that's where Schoolhouse.World comes into the picture. The pandemic hits, and Khan Academy's traffic goes to the roof. We've always known, well before the pandemic, that small group tutoring is really the gold standard. There's actually a lot of research papers that even small group tutoring by someone who learned the same material last semester or last year can actually be highly effective, and in some cases even more effective.
Yeah, there's something on that. Someone who learned it recently. I mean, I think they've kind of known this. This is why there are TAs, or one of the reasons why there are teacher's assistants in college and university courses. People that are, I've noticed that very old professors, or just not even in the context of education, people that have been doing something for a very, very long time and who are very good at it, aren't usually the best teachers. Because either the skill or the knowledge has become so kind of innate to them that they can't place themselves in the shoes of somebody who doesn't understand the material.
Right. Yeah, I've heard that a lot.
Yeah. So that's why it makes sense that I'm glad he mentioned that, like, some of the tutors have just learned it themselves. And I'll share a personal example of that on one of these future videos, but that's definitely the case. And so that's something to keep in mind is peer tutor groups, like study groups have always been useful. It's always been a thing, I think, in a lot of schools. But if you can also get somebody that's taken the course and is like 1 year ahead of you, that's super helpful in learning, because they remember all the pitfalls, they remember all the roadblocks and how they overcame them. So it's a super valuable resource.
And they said another way, they know precisely what your limited toolkit is, because they still have kind of the same limited toolkit plus a little more. So they'll solve the problems using the limited skills you have to solve them, rather than whatever abstraction somebody at a high level can use.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
And so I started reaching out to some friends and say, couldn't we build a prototype of a platform where folks who need help in a topic could say they need help, and that other people, high quality vetted tutors, could say, yes, I could run a small group tutoring session on that topic. And by the end of the summer, it was working. We were getting amazing stories. 13 and 14-year-olds helping people who are in their 50s try to get their high school diploma. We're seeing people in very disparate conditions, economic strata, life stages, cultures, being able to connect and empathize with each other around meaningful work that matters for both of them. We were seeing that it is actually possible to scale up tutoring by leveraging people's willingness to do good for others. when Schoolhouse.World started, I thought the game-changing aspect of it would be that we have figured out a way to scale high-quality tutoring. But I actually think the real game changer is when we're able to connect with other human beings, when that other human being genuinely says, thank you, you just changed my life. You just unlocked my mind. I will never forget what you just did.
What do you think education will look like in 1,000 years?
I like to think on multiple scales. So, to answer your question, 1,000 years, I don't know. With CRISPR and genetic engineering, we might be able to download knowledge, take a pill, who knows? We'll be in some virtual reality assuming humanity keeps progressing. But I think over the next, let's call it 30 to 50 years, I think we're gonna have a world where anyone on the planet is going to have access to all the core academic material and non-academic material they need to be a fully actualized person.
Yeah, so it's interesting. He mentioned one of the examples was somebody helping somebody get their high school diploma, and he calls it basically a tutoring platform. So there's something there where he's still, and that whole model is still kind of tied to this is this extra thing you could do to help you get through regular school, right? And it's not a knock on him, that's a much needed service. But yeah, I think, and he was even getting towards it at the end, like Khan Academy in X number of years could just be a school in itself, right? And could replace, as we were saying before, could replace older institutions that have outlived their usefulness potentially.
Yeah, I think that's ideal. I think it's a wonderful ideal. I think natively, eventually we have to end up there. I think that makes sense, or will end up there. But then the trouble is right now, this question is, can the society actually support a community of people who are, let's say all of a sudden 9 out of 10 people decide to really apply themselves to learn engineering skills tomorrow, and 90% of the American population just goes down that path. It's I don't know if we have a society right now that can carry or utilize in professional context that many people. Obviously, people can create their own spaces. That's a different way to go about it. But the way our society is kind of structured, the way we kind of, like you said before, we haven't yet got caught up to respecting this as a legitimate learning resource. Because one of the things that focuses you is knowing that if I take the time to learn something deeply, really deeply, with a lot of pieces to it, that I can create a life out of this. And if it's not clear how you're gonna manifest a life from this knowledge, it's difficult to really stay focused or carry it all the way through. So I
don't think we have, in that, using your example, there wouldn't be enough jobs working, full-time jobs for 300 million engineers, if that case happened, right? But taking it back to coding, I still recommend to basically everybody I know that has an office job or a knowledge job or any job basically where you're on a computer, that you should think about learning coding, right? It's a force multiplier. If you start a business, if you want to build an app, if you want to build software to help you could automate your job, whatever that may be. If it involves typing on a computer and moving a mouse, it can be automated. So yeah, I think there's a world in which, everyone might not have a computer science engineer, computer programming type job, but I don't know, I feel like schools are moving in this direction. I think a lot of people, depending on how good your school system is, I think most young kids are exposed to programming at a pretty early age, which is, I think, a great thing. So it's an interesting question of, and then if we did have all those engineers, we would be able to engineer our way out of a lot of problems, economic and otherwise. So we wouldn't even have, this gets into a post-scarcity world where everyone's living off of UBI and people build things for fun or just do things for fun. And the artists can just do art, and it's a possibility.
I don't literally think it's a bad idea. Obviously, it's a very good idea. I'm trying to consider that even even without a person like Saul Khan or multiple people like Saul Khan corralling and giving you a data center to go to on the internet, like a destination where you can put your mind in that space. Technically, again, the idea is, you have a phone in your hand, you have a search engine, you got everything you need. Like technically that's true, but why doesn't it work for people who want people to use it that way? I don't think it's because people are lazy. I don't think any of that. I think it's because it's difficult to contextualize and structure that information yourself. It's sort of focus basically when you're given everything.
Yeah.
And it's also really, really hard to know, how to pursue something if you don't know how it's gonna service you or where it's gonna land you socially. I think the one benefit of schools are the promise that maybe you're kind of waning for some degree paths, not others, like probably law and medicine and engineering. This doesn't really apply, but many others. It's like when you finish this degree, you'll have access to a social professional landscape that provides you challenges to work on, apply this thing, and means of income. Like that's pretty much a guarantee, more or less, for certain domains. Many others not so much, but yeah, I don't know. There's got to be a way that people culturally get kind of smart or savvy about how to construct that knowledge or how to upskill on their own. I don't know. I'd be curious to see what that might look like.
Yeah, me too. I think it could go in a lot of different directions. I think you're right that there is kind of there's almost too many options. So that's why we're hoping to help narrow down at least a little bit, what paths, because there's infinite paths you could take if you want to learn something new right now. So that's why part of the reason why we're covering this stuff is like, what actually should you do, can you do, to acquire a skill, and if you want to use it to get a job or to going off. I think it was our last video where we talked about kind of one of the ultimate goals is not renting out your time to somebody else, right? Taking a salary or an hourly wage, but building something, right, that you own and that you can profit off of. And that is more and more possible the more technology there is. But so let's see, we've got another video. So this is one of, I think, the more interesting kind of ideas that Saul Khan has done, flipping the classroom. So this video is from Fora.tv, and we'll hear him describe it and talk about that a bit.
Attention, 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 attention.
Now, so now you now have it's about 2 million viewers a month.
2 million unique viewers a month,
Right.
watching like 200,000 to 300,000 videos a day.
And your data guys gave me a great stat. At any given second, there's about 15 questions being answered on your site.
Yeah.
So there's huge traffic here, and you've got classrooms that are using this, and you've introduced this concept of flipping the way teaching happens, flipping the classroom. Tell us what you.
Yeah, well, there's 2 layers there, and once again, not my idea. I started putting these videos out. Individual learners started saying that they're helpful, but then fast forward, some teachers started saying, "Hey, you already gave the lecture on X, Y, or Z. I don't need to give the lecture anymore." So instead of me giving the lecture and the homework happening at home, I flipped the classroom where the lecture now happens at home and homework is now happening in the classroom.
Right.
And just that small change, and the technology isn't that sophisticated. It's just on-demand video. That small change, now you've turned the classroom into this interactive experience where now you're not at home without any feedback, without anyone to help you. Now you're in the classroom, the teacher can help you, your peers can help you. The teacher sees in real time if anyone's stuck before the exam, after which everyone has to move on to the next concept. And so it turned, it's one of these weird things where technology actually turned the experience into a more interactive, more human experience.
That's right. Yeah. That's right. Well, I remember being at home, being like working on homework. I'd get stuck, and there's nothing, right?
Yeah.
I mean, there's no one there to help you out. You actually ought to be doing that in the classroom when there's someone, either another student or a teacher, who can come and help.
And then the next level beyond that is now that we have all the software, that stuff that now it's every student can work at their own pace all the time,
right?
And then the teacher almost all the time can be just very surgical, as you mentioned, about jumping in, or even better, getting peers to help each other.
So I want to frame this a little bit more. I found it. I couldn't re-find it, but I found it a long time ago. There's a pilot program they did to test this idea out. I think it was a school district somewhere in Southern California where they based it on Sal Khan's design, where it's a flipped classroom. Essentially, all that means is that when the kids are in the classroom, they're given their homework is to go home and essentially watch the lectures or watch all the content that provides the concepts. That's their homework. And then they come into class, and the whole class time is spent breaking off into small groups and problem solving with each other. And then if they really get stuck, you hold your hand up, and the teacher can come and then help you push through that friction point. And they basically discovered that obviously kids were way more effective. They learned way better. Their test scores were higher. But then even more interestingly, and I really wish I could have found this again, more interestingly, the kids that were prior to this, they had, the kids were kind of broke up into strata. Like there's the high performers, the average performers, like the low performers, like chronic low performers. They found out that by doing it this way, they had a far easier time of identifying precisely where the low performers were dropping the ball, because if concepts are built on other concepts, they could really see, like, track immediately where they faltered, and then they could bring them up to speed. And what happened over the course of this project was that basically all of the lines trended up high. So every single kid got up to speed, and they all became high performers at the end of this. And it makes sense, because rather than going home and whatever limited retention you had from the classroom that day, and you go home and all of a sudden you're staring at these problems and you don't know how to apply what you learn, and you just get frustrated and you don't gain anything from that. And then you're already in the next class. There's a new subject being taught. It's the opposite. You were given the concepts, and it was your job to understand the rough idea. But then when it came time to working with the thing, you had an expert with you that could help clarify for you. And it's encouraging that it was that effective. Obviously, it's a small study, but it's encouraging that it was that effective. And it's being mirrored in other places that this is how learning is done. The author of Ultra Learning talks about that, the importance of a direct practice. Scientists who study like the 10,000 error theory or expertise talk about deliberate practice just versus like mundane repetition, just the idea that you're actually actively engaged. They've studied people that are really, really high performers to find out that their internal mental model for the thing they're doing, their dialogue and their visual model for whatever they're doing is way more complex. And they build that thing by engaging with it over and over and turning it around and adding layers and layers. So the engagement part is really important. And this is one way that you naturally create a classroom that promises that that's going to happen for the kids, instead of just kind of expecting that maybe it'll happen, depending on the kids' aptitude and how disciplined they are when they go home, and a lot of other factors. So I think it's a good practice. It'd be nice to see it happen.
Yeah, and that also depends on like how much help they have with their family, or if they have like an older sibling that can help with homework. But I was lucky to have, there's so many variables. Yeah, and it seems so obvious, because in the first video when Colin was talking about instructors, they do just repeat. I mean, there's a little bit more to it, but like a lecture is basically a static thing, right? It's like you get a chance to answer or to ask questions as a student, but the lecture is more or less the same every year. So like it seems so obvious to flip it, right? To record lecture, put it on a video. It's super easy. Kids watch it at home. I would rather do that than homework, if I'm honest. Like, I'd rather watch YouTube. I can watch it 2x speed and get through all that, And then, and then my favorite part of school is always like the lab stuff, or like the group project stuff, where you're like collaboratively working with peers. If you have a deficiency, maybe someone in your group can help out, or if you know a little bit more than they do, you can help them out. And then the teacher, as you said, is there to come in and kind of smooth over the edges. So yeah, it is a seemingly obvious model that sounds like people are starting to adopt. I did pull up one study. I mean, there was an experiment for a college, Carl Wyman and colleagues. This is Desalorius et al., published in 2011. They looked at two sections of a large enrollment physics class, and they switched it halfway through so that half the class did this flipped engagement, and they had scores. The average score of the regular classroom was 41, and the average score of the flipped classroom was 74. It's unclear if that's out of 100 or not, but it's still a effect size of 2.5 standard deviations, which is massive statistically
Right.
speaking.
Right.
Yeah, so it clearly works, and intuitively seems better. Just like thinking about it, even if I had no research to back it up, like it makes sense, right? Like you want as he said, I think there towards the end, like when you're at home and you're working on your homework and you're stuck and you might not have anybody there to help you, like what do you do? Like now you can go to Khan Academy and they help you, but like pre-internet, you were just kind of stuck and you had to wait till the next morning to ask the teacher about it. But now you do all that work with the teacher there. It just makes so much sense. It seems so obvious to me.
It should be, yeah. It seems. I hope that we move there. I think even 5-10 years ago, that there was that sticky question of like, well, not everyone's got a computer, not everyone's got internet access. That's less and less of a problem now. I think I don't know. Maybe I'm completely ignorant on this, but I feel like we're getting to a place where that's not really an issue for most of the population. Like
Yeah.
phones exist, internet exists, Wi-Fi. I
Yeah,
don't know.
there
Free
was an
Wi-Fi.
issue. There was a little bit of an issue during the pandemic, I remember, because every kid got sent home, and some were more able than others to get kind of set up online. Like not everyone had an internet connection at home, for example. So like,
Right. Right.
that's changing very quickly. Schools are giving out iPads or laptops. I think iPads more often now, or tablets. So yeah, this is totally doable. Those aren't expensive, in the scheme of education. Buying each kid like a $250 laptop or
Yeah.
tablet. So it's doable. And closing that gap of kind of just making sure everyone has internet at home. Like we're working on that as a country anyway. Like we're maybe moving towards satellite internet, basically just reaches everybody for free potentially. So all of those little hurdles, I mean, they're not so little sometimes depending on if it's you, but society-wise and like scale-wise, those aren't big hurdles to overcome. Getting internet into people's homes and
Right.
making sure they have a device they can learn on. So speaking of learning online, next video. So again, shout out to 4.tv linked below for that video. Flip this classroom, Khan Academy. The next one is about MOOCs or
Massive open online courses.
yes, thank you. So these are usually free courses that you take online. Usually it's on a schedule. So it's like, you got to start at a certain time, and every week there's a certain amount of stuff you do. So it's structured somewhat similar to a kind of standard university or even high school course, but there's a lot of, it basically does this model. So the lectures are videos. There are TAs that are available to answer questions. There's like forums, community forums where all the students get together and talk to each other. So there's like peer communication. So all of the models that he talked about are built into the MOOC kind of framework. And Alex and I have both done this. So I took, I'm never gonna remember.
I'm trying to get the name of the class. Right?
Yeah, so I've taken a few. So Harvard has an incredible it's called CS50, and that's if you actually want to become like a computer scientist, like if you want to learn like algorithms and data structures and like C and like hardcore programming languages and like actually use it to build real software, that is a hell of a course because it starts with C, which is like a very low level old programming language that is still very useful because you can do very performant things with it. You can use it like that's a lot of graphics, like games are built on C more or less, or something like it, because you can get more performance out of the computer. But as you abstract into higher levels and you get into a language like Python, it's not as fast when you're running it, but it's so easy to write it and almost reads like English on the page. It's the syntax is so straightforward. So for Python, I wanted to brush up on it a few years ago, so I took MIT's Introduction to Computer Science and Programming in Python. And that one, they also do a little bit of algorithm stuff, but it's more focused on just kind of getting you up to speed on Python. And then I took it a second time right after, and I did that as a community teaching assistant. And so I think that is one of the best ways to learn, is to teach, right? So I'm really glad that I did that. And I already knew Python well because I had taken it, I'd used it in a job before, I had learned it in school, in college, years before that. But I just kind of wanted to brush up on it.
You helped me. Yeah, I take that exact course after, and you helped me step through that.
Yeah. So it's definitely check out, and those are free, right? So outside of that, there's like Udemy, there's Coursera, there's all these big ones where a lot of the courses are free. Sometimes you have to pay for like a certificate. If you want to have a certificate of completion, you have to pay for that. But if you just want the knowledge, it's generally free. Or some of them are paid, or you have to pay a monthly subscription, but they're very low compared to like a college tuition, for example. So that's a MOOC. That's our experiences with MOOC. Let's hear from, so this is from Dave Cormier, linked below. We'll hear how to be successful in a MOOC. And I think this really applies more generally to just how to be successful at learning broadly. But let's dive right in.
So, you've just registered for your first MOOC and you're wondering what to do next. There are many ways you can succeed in a MOOC. You might just want to follow along and get a sense of the topic. You might be doing it for course credit. You might be doing it to develop a new learning network or to help finish that project you're working on. This video is how I look at success in a massive open online course. Let's say you've just registered for a MOOC about thingamajiggets. You've registered at the course site and you've decided that you're going to commit your time, but you're trying to figure out where to start. This is 5 steps to succeed in a MOOC. You need to orient, declare, network, cluster, and focus. First, you need to orient yourself. Where are the materials, the links you'll need to use every week, the times of the live sessions? Gather these together, bookmark them. You'll find that in some ways, a MOOC is a lot like just being on the web, with one big exception. A MOOC is paced. There are readings and topics, and they're separated into weeks. While no one is going to be checking on you to make sure you read everything, the materials are there, and while you don't need to cover everything, the more you cover, the more you can participate. The next thing you need to do is declare yourself. You need to have a place for your thoughts and your reflections to live. It might be a blog that you write in, it might be a discussion forum that's part of the course. Your MOOC will have some way of gathering all the reflections on your course together. It might be a tag or some other method. Let's say your course tag is Thingamajiggets 2011. Maybe you already have a blog, or you can set one up online. You can write a reaction to one of the readings, add a course tag to it, and post it to Twitter. And then, probably, nothing happens. No one grades it, no one comments. You've declared yourself, but no one seems to have noticed. You need a network.
So I'm going to keep in the coding context for now, but I think this applies to most disciplines. I'll just use the example of coding. So if you take a coding course, especially with the aim to get a job in the future, I would highly recommend creating a GitHub account. So GitHub is where probably 90% of the code in the world lives. Both open source and private companies use it to host their code. So if you create a profile, it's like Facebook or LinkedIn, but for programmers, right? So you can create a profile, people can see public projects that you're working on. So if you, they start out very basic with what's called like hello world programs, where it's literally one line and you just print out the words hello world. And that's like classically the first program anyone ever writes. But if you put that in, if you create a GitHub profile, or for artists, it might be like ArtStation, I believe is the big one right now. For musicians, it's SoundCloud. For, I'm sure there's similar things for all types of engineers, or not even for all types of kind of career paths. You want to document your progress, so it's really useful. So if you're starting a MOOC, especially a programming one, create a GitHub account, put all of your like solutions, because they're going to give you problem sets and you have to write code to solve them, put all of those into a GitHub account, and start creating a portfolio. So in this case it's code, but that, you know, is typically portfolio is like for designers or artists, but portfolio can be, you know, any of your past work. So just start thinking about that. And it might seem embarrassing to put such simple code into GitHub and to later show that. And so the purpose of that is to basically later share it with an employer, because a lot of times when you're applying for a job, they'll ask if you have like a public GitHub profile, and you can send it to them if you want. And if you don't have a degree, that's how you're basically going to be judged, is the quality of your code. And it's okay if it starts out shitty, because eventually you're going to be building much cooler things if you follow these steps. So I would just highly recommend, regardless of the medium, regardless of the topic or subject you're learning, create an online portfolio tracking your progress. I mean, you can always kind of hide your early work if you want to, but for your own benefit and for employability and for like demonstrating competence, you really want to collect your work in one place online where you can show it off. Networking is kind of the next stage of that, so let's hear him talk about that.
You need to follow some other people reflecting on the material and make some connections. Go back and take a look at the communications you've been getting from the facilitators. Do a search for the course tag. Find some people's work, read a few posts, and comment on them. Those connections and your comments are what the course is all about.
Yeah. So this is really important. Again, in the MOOC context, there's usually like forums. So post your questions there, answer other people's questions if you can. Like surely you're probably, even if you're not ahead of the class, you're probably ahead of a couple students. So if someone has a really basic question, you might know the answer. Give it a shot. So you can kind of build your profile within the course and connect with people that way. Because that's, as we're going to get to and we already talked about it in the context, like breaking up into small groups and working on problems. The social aspect of learning is super important. I think it's highly suboptimal to just learn alone in a vacuum and not kind of bounce ideas off other people, not ask questions of other people, not answer other people's questions. Like I said, I learned a lot in my second time going through that Python course, teaching other people or helping other people with their problems. I wasn't really a teacher, I was just an assistant, but I would be in the forums. That was my job, was to help people and answer their questions. And so I learned a lot during that second phase. So definitely this networking part. And it can be done. It doesn't have to, it can be within the MOOC, it can be outside, it can be on LinkedIn, whatever. But reach out to people, find people that are on the same path as you, maybe a little bit ahead, maybe a little bit behind. They can both help you in different ways.
Better yet, go back to your spot and write a thoughtful reply to someone's questions or concerns. Tell them about it. Make connections. There is a discussion going on, and a discussion is probably what you took this course for. After a few weeks, it's probably time to cluster. During the first couple of weeks, the readings and commenting, you'll notice that there are a couple of other people whose interest in thingamajiggets is very close to yours. You'll find that you're returning to their work more often, that they're commenting on your work more often, that you're connecting. You don't need to connect with everyone. Find yourself a cluster of people who are focused on what you're interested in. A group of people for you to work with, maybe even a community that might share ideas after the course is over.
Yeah, and just another anecdote, like this is how startups are born. This is how, something like, if you've seen The Social Network about the starting of Facebook, I mean, obviously that happened at Harvard in the university context, but like people are doing this. Actually, this is what Mr. Beast did. If you're a big YouTube person or a Mr. Beast fan, he found like a handful of other creators when he was small, and they would just like talk all day about how to make better YouTube videos. So there's a huge, and they all blew up and became super successful on YouTube. So yeah, finding a community of people that are kind of headed in the same direction as you, super powerful. And this is, in my opinion, how great ideas are kind of born, and then from there, great businesses are kind of born.
Finally, and this is especially important to me, you need to focus. Even with all the positive connections and the interesting readings and the learning about thingamajiggets, I always find that a little over halfway through an open course, my mind starts to wander. Maybe you're not sure what you're trying to do with the course. If you're not trying to finish the course for credit, why are you trying to do it? Maybe you have an idea about something that you could do with thingamajiggets at work and have decided to post your idea on your blog. You can draw on your new cluster to help you with your plan. Start a project, maybe a paper, maybe a grant, and use the rest of the course to finish it. After 10 weeks, you'll know lots more about thingamajiggets. You'll have made some valuable and useful professional connections and have a project that you can apply right back to your work. You'll have succeeded. Orient, declare, network, cluster, and focus. MOOCs are open, and that includes being open to different ways of success. This is my way.
Yeah, so I'm glad you brought up the focus and the why question there at the end. You know, that's kind of, it is easy to lose steam a little bit way through these courses if it's just you in a room. But if you engage with the community more, and most importantly, if you kind of remember your why, like, why am I doing this? And that could be updated along the way. But if you remember, you know, why, that will help with the motivation for sure. Is Alex? Oh, fucking audio is off.
When you tell you when
yeah.
you succeeded. My bad. I was typing something, so I muted. I'll tell you when you succeeded too, because you have your own standard or reasons for doing something, and you're kind of like, why did I do that when it's over, or you're nearing the end, and it's like, oh yeah, well maybe XYZ didn't happen, but maybe XYZ has nothing to do with the reasons that I set out to do this to begin with. Maybe that's totally okay. So it's good to know where you're at.
Yeah. So next up, again, shout out to Dave Cormier for that video, linked below. What's next, Alex? Why don't you tee this one up for us?
Okay. I came across this. This clip isn't from Vice, but Vice had a segment about these guys that's pretty interesting. I think they had a series called like Post Radical or something about different aspects of skateboarding and culture, and one of them was a skate school in Malmo, Sweden. It's basically a school where a huge part of the curriculum is their gymnasium's a giant skate park, and they have an outdoor skate park, and the kids, they come there from all over the area. It's a high school, essentially, where these kids were not performing well in other contexts. They come there, they get a traditional education. It's not like they're not taking math and science courses, but they just blend in a lot of time in the day to skate. And then they also have structured activities where they're, paired off in groups and doing video projects together, creating content, chasing a specific trick that might take them a lot of attempts or effort to figure out, et cetera, et cetera. So it's interesting to see something that was treated as like an anarchistic behavior, totally what's the word? Anti-conformist behavior. Yeah, antisocial, anti-conformist thing in its origins and its roots. That's totally helping kids to show up for their lives. So, yeah.
Yeah, and it's a bit of a pivot, but yeah, it's just kind of another example of like how school doesn't have to be the way it's always been. It can be reinvented.
Exactly.
It can be iterated and improved upon and revolutionized, actually, in this case. And I did find the Vice video, so I posted that in chat. It's a 40-minute video, so we can't cover it today, but it's
really
worth
interesting.
watching. Yeah, it's definitely worth watching. But let's hear this from Al Jazeera English. They did a shorter story on it, so let's hear what they have to say.
You don't have to wait until school's out to go skateboarding in Malmo. This is a school, one with skating at the heart of its curriculum, with students from as far away as Iceland and the Faroe Isles coming to southern Sweden for an education after struggling in regular schools.
Like before I came here, I had a really hard time in school. I mean, they have like found a way for us more energetic kids to like concentrate in school when we have like hours during school time where we can skate. So we could come down here like in between classes or at lunch and just, cool off and skate out our energy and come back to the classroom and sit still.
Actually, that's a really good point. school, sitting in the chair for 8 hours minus what, like a 20-minute recess. If I guess when you're younger, you get the recess, like, or a 30-minute PE class. Like, it's just it's training us potentially well for an office job sitting in a cubicle, but like young kids, I think especially young boys, it's not a good environment being stuck in a classroom for that many hours a day. So it's and with like ADHD on the rise, like this is a really interesting solution. They already mentioned that this is a school for people that were maybe failing or having trouble with kind of standard school settings. So yeah, you can totally rethink school. I mean, you can go beyond this. We don't have any videos on it for today. I didn't really want to. It's like kind of a whole other topic, but like homeschooling or pod schooling, or you can get your neighborhood together and teach all your kids and do half of it outdoors.
Right. I think the fundamental underlying idea here is, I think too, it's that learning is not relegated to education. This doesn't mean to say throw education away. Oh, we can do without. I'm not even saying I think that's foolish too. I'm more saying like you're not just supposed to be learning in the context of school.
Yeah.
You can take it on your own. You can use outside resources. You can think creatively about how to be doing it all the time to chase down things that interest you. Yeah, I think I don't know. Maybe that's a way to begin. It's like shifting your attitude towards what learning is. I think most adults don't read. Was like 80% of people haven't read a book this year, or something like that. Maybe that statistic's way out of line, but it points to the idea that a lot of people, once they get out of school, they stop really seeing value or even a reason to be reading or learning new things, and that's a huge shame, I think, because there's a lot out there, a lot of space to grow. Yeah. Interestingly, I meant to pull this in earlier, but I couldn't find a moment. Singapore has a lot of national initiatives that are targeted at making sure their job force is dynamic and flexible. They have a lot of funding and structured programs in place to take low skilled employees and upskill them. They have structures in place to take people who are already in the middle of their careers and put them into completely new career space as they're gonna like attach job duties in a completely different industry domains. They can kind of get up to speed and then transition. They have money for people that are even like later in life to take on new skill sets. So like there's a huge push in that country to constantly have people learning and reimagining kind of what their skill set is and what their course is in their professional lives. So yeah, I don't know. It's a good, I think especially now too, as we're pushing into a future where the traditional everything doesn't seem to be functioning the way it used to. I think we've been lagging in our approach to education, but also further lagging in our understanding that, we have more ready tools available at hand to adapt on our own. And then in addition, we are actually fundamentally like designed to adapt. We're not actually, we thought, I don't have a classroom. How am I going to do it? It's like, that was never the best way to go to begin with. So, yeah.
Yeah. And the landscape, as we've mentioned, is I think there's a generational thing here where if you didn't, me and Alex are, I think, elder millennials technically. So we didn't have the internet when we were like 5, but we did have the internet for most of our lives, or at least we were on computers. But if you were for the generation above us, especially like the baby boomers, like they're having trouble, I think, with like, or they might have more trouble with the online learning thing. But like as we age and the people below us age and everybody is digitally native, everybody's had an iPad since they were 1 or whatever, it's going to become more ubiquitous and expected, I think, of people to just learn throughout their life. And we're already seeing that with podcasts. Like someone like Dan Carlin, where you're listening to you can listen to hours and hours and hours on like a single battle of the Civil War. Andrew Huerman, where you can listen to hours and hours and hours on how to get the best sleep every night. Like we're obviously, like as a society, thirsty for information knowledge, the latest science, history. It's just it hasn't been easily accessible, and there haven't been. I think a lot of people have had, me included, have had bad experiences in school, and so they think learning sucks because they had a couple bad teachers. But like, if you listen to Dan Carlin or Andrew Huberman or Lex Friedman, like there are people out there that are brilliant at communicating ideas of their domain.
It's a big deal that, I mean, you follow like any Pareto distribution or just like the best people in the field are always occupying the top 10%, and there's always a giant gap, by the way, between the top 10% and the lower 90. Like Kobe Bryant wasn't just a little bit better than everybody around him, or 90% of the already elite athletes in the NBA. Obviously, they're already being selected up to be the 1%, but he wasn't just like the best of the 1% or one of the best. He was like way better than 99% of the other people on that court. So like that applies to everything else. So, but in this case, with YouTube, internet platforms beginning to get better and better at incentivizing people to create quality content, knowledge people to create in-depth content, like that Dan Carlin example you just gave, because it takes massive amounts of research and time on his part. Everyone can get access though, and I think it's gonna hopefully will only improve. Hopefully we'll get better and better teachers available to us in a public sphere that everybody kind of knows to go to. Yeah, I don't know. We'll see.
Yeah, I mean, I think that I'd argue that's already happening. I just hope it continues the same direction, and then there's just more and more of them.
Malmo has a unique attitude to skateboarding. The city council employs a skateboarding coordinator, while skaters are welcomed in public spaces, on public monuments, and in the many skate parks. The skateboarding school, Bryggeriet Gymnasium, has been an example for the city's skate scene and the development of its skaters.
Well, it's also a statement about the society they have there, because they skimmed past it. That outdoor skate park they're at is this massive, beautiful public square in a public space, and it's like beautifully designed. I don't know what kind of money goes into something like that, but it wasn't cheap. And then obviously it's in the public space. So usually that happens, like in America and most places, it becomes an eyesore, it gets destroyed, it's problematic, it's attracting an element we don't want, or whatever the thing you put in quotations is. But like, it says something about the culture and how they view creativity or youth or novelty, whatever components of make you a flexible society, that they would even have funding for something like that. Yeah.
Yeah, although I'm not sure, like if you're going to build a park in the middle of the city, like that's already an expensive endeavor. I'm not sure if it's that much more expensive to add a few features that make it a skate park as opposed to just like a fountain park with a fountain. You know, like
right.
It's just a shift in thinking of like realizing like, oh, like if we have all these young kids skating in the park, maybe they won't be like smoking weed in the alley or like committing crimes or like, you know, like I think that's part of the that's part of the drive of having a lot of well-maintained areas for kids to hang out and recreate in, is to keep them occupied outside of school hours and keep them out of trouble.
Yeah, I mean, that's what LA is good for that, because it has public skate parks all over the place. There's still a lot of places people skate publicly, because LA is known for being one of the biggest skate meccas in the country, or the biggest skate mecca in the USA. But obviously, if you're from some town and you don't have access to anything else, you're gonna skate public property. You're gonna find a way to do it because you don't have anywhere else to go, and then you're gonna naturally become labeled as you're destructive and you're a bad kid, whatever, because you're just trying to do the thing you like to do. Your goal is not to break windows, otherwise you'd be running around throwing bricks at people's windows. That's not what you're doing. You're trying to make the board do something on a handrail. That's not the same thing.
Yeah.
Anyway.
You see the guys back here, they're working for something that they want. And with skateboarding, that's so easy. And our goal and aim is to use that dynamic in other subjects and walks of life as well.
Yeah, that's also really important. I tried to pick this back up again later in life during quarantine, and skating everything's hard, right? Everything has an abstract trial and error cycle, hard walls you come up against. The difference with something like sport or skateboarding in particular is it's pretty punishing when you make an error. you can fall and completely slip out and you're landing on pavement and it hurts a lot. There's that wild sense of like that gut feeling in your stomach, like when you're falling backwards.
Yeah.
When you make the errors, it's really, really clear that it's not working out. And then it takes so many repetitions just to get your first clean result, like hundreds and like maybe thousands. And that's a really good lesson, I think, in focus, in resiliency, and grit, and overcoming frustration and long-term vision. It's a really good microcosm activity for like what you need to deal with life. And I think in a traditional school setting, for example, again, one where you flow through the whole day basically attending lectures, you can go pretty far through the day without ever really encountering that much friction. There might be a lot of social friction, other things that happen, notoriously those things happen in high school settings, but like in terms of like managing information or figuring out like who you are in the context of these subjects, like who am I in the like what am I really getting involved with the science and figuring like pressing up against it, like or the math pressing up against it, like not necessarily, but something like this every second, yeah, you are.
Yeah, and we've talked about this before, but I think it's really, 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 really important is like whatever you're working on, you should test it up against the real world, right? Like you can't just read a book on skateboarding and then, go and compete and think you're going to be able to drop into a half pipe. The same, I was going to bring this up earlier when we were talking about coding. The same thing goes, like you can take the course, even the best courses, usually they have pretty big projects built in, but the best thing to do after the course is because the projects are still structured. They give you like a scaffolding and then they give you a lot of assistance. The best thing to do after a course like that is to go and build something in the real, in the real world, in the digital world, build something for yourself or for an imagined customer or an imagined user that might be interested, and actually just build something from start to end without any like prompts, without anyone telling you what to do. Just think of something that you want to try. And that type of project really tests your knowledge, and you kind of sprawl through all the different permutations of like, oh, like I learned how to do this one thing in Python in the class, but like I needed to do it a little bit differently. And so like, how do you make those adjustments? And like, so testing your knowledge against the real world, Alex has used jujitsu a lot. I use mountain biking as this example a lot, but like, when you fuck up, like the code runs or it doesn't run, like your app works or it doesn't, like you land the trick or you don't. So like there's a lot to be said for doing that trial and error, doing that really focused, intense practicing the trick 100 times or 1,000 times, and then you land it. And that's actually a huge sense of accomplishment. Same thing with code. If you've been working on something for weeks or months and it's not quite coming together, and then finally it does and it works, and you show your friends, and it's a great accomplishment. And it's a confidence builder. It lets you know that you're actually on the path to being competent in that arena. And that is really valuable, because if you go into a job interview or if you go into a skate park, whatever it is, your kind of inner feeling about your ability is pretty important. And if you've tested yourself with those 1,000 attempts, when you roll into that half pipe, you're going to feel a lot more confident, and that's going to come through in your skating or in your coding or in your job interview or whatever it may be.
The Vans Park series, part of skateboarding's world tour, stops off in Malmo at a venue that has given children from nearby housing estates a top-class skate park whenever the pros aren't in town. Malmo has embraced the subculture of skateboarding, but in the wider world, there are some who are unhappy about the sport's entry into the mainstream, saying that skateboarding's selection as an Olympic sport at Tokyo 2020 goes against skateboarding's roots on the streets.
That's just so dumb. But, well, actually, I thought he was going to say that they were just opposed to it because it's like it's like a juvenile or like a delinquent sport. Well, that's even worse. Yeah, well, it's even worse that there are skate purists that are saying keep it out of the Olympics because we're just too underground. Both of those.
There's a good reason people are upset, but also this is the inevitable outcome. So you gotta kind of get with it and embrace. But I do kind of understand why people have a problem with it.
Dude, as soon as Tony Hawk's Pro Skater, you and I both remember this well. As soon as that game came out, everybody got a skateboard, or everybody
Yeah.
wanted to get a skateboard. Like that,
Yeah, yeah.
it turned mainstream in like 1999 or whatever
X
that was.
Games was already doing it. Tony Hawk was already doing it. Yeah, it was already there. This
Yeah.
is, I think what's happening now, though, just as an aside, is that now that's an Olympic sport. You literally have young kids being groomed like other athletes in other sports, like where there's like young basketball players whose stats are being tracked from the time they're playing when they're in third grade, and they have trainers and shit, and like that's starting to happen now. Where kids have like coaches, and they have like athletic coaches teaching them, oh, you need to work on your flexibility. You got to be doing like squats and weightlifting. Like it's getting way away from like the total DIY, like kids just like hucking themselves off of buildings and stuff and figuring out as they go. It's becoming this.
But that's still happening too, though. You know, so it's
it's both. That's why it's not a problem. It's just the money grab aspect is now really, really apparent, and that people don't like that because you have people that are buying their way into the sport basically. But the other side of that too is that you're just going to get higher caliber people out of this. So
and having money as much as it can corrupt, like having money around the sport. Like if you hear Tony Hawk or those early guys talking about skating back in the day, they never dreamed of making money off of it. It was just like maybe they'd get free wheels, they'd get a free board every once in a while. But like now you can actually make a proper career out of it. So like there's obviously, as you said, there's pros and cons, but like, yeah, it's a real thing now. People are doing it. It's a potential career path if you take it very seriously.
It's not going anywhere. So it's
definitely.
We were kind of rebels or whatever, you know, it was its own thing, our own art, our own culture. And now that such a big organization like the Olympics wants it to be an Olympic sport, confuses people, or it just kind of angers people because of how skateboarding's been for such a long time and the change that it's going through.
I wouldn't say they're against it, but most people think it's going to be done badly.
A skate education in Malmo could make Sweden a strong Olympic contender, but most roads to the podium will still begin on the street. Paul Rees, Al Jazeera, Malmo.
Nice. Yeah, so we just that was a bit of a curveball at the end, but we just wanted to show kind of, you know, I'm trying to think, like you can kind of recreate this in your own life. I mean, even if you just go to a standard school, if you skate on your way there, you skate during your break, like you can, if you have something you're passionate about, you can integrate it, or even outside of school, you can integrate it in your life in this type of way. Maybe not so deep, obviously, that you're like skating, you know, inside your school in a skate park, but like whatever your thing is, put effort in, focus on it, practice, test it out, you know, do it in the real world, you know, on concrete, you know, on real code or on real canvas, whatever, you know, your thing is. Go and do it and show it to people and share it with people and find people that are on, you know, find other skaters, find other musicians, find other coders, whatever your thing is. You get infinitely better, you get much faster, much better, much faster that way, for sure. So I think that's everything for today. Anything else, Alex?
Yeah, I don't know. I think that the takeaway from all this is just I don't know. I don't know what it is. Use the resources around you. Look around you to engage with things that you want to be engaged with. Don't stop learning things, and then also maybe have confidence that there's something you actually want to learn. There are routes for you to go about it. There probably are not as many hurdles as you think in front of you, whether it be financial or geographical or whatever you think they are, or even time-based. There's probably a way to get it done.
Most of those hurdles are in your head, you know, or they were for me. They were like my own self-limitation, my own thinking, and that's why I like that real-world challenge so much, is because like you objectively know if you landed the kickflip. Like there's no like faking it. There's no pretending you did or you didn't. Like if you do it, then you did it. And except if nobody was there to see it, then you're fucked. But yeah.
That's a thing in the skating community, by the way. It's like the first person that makes a serious trick at a serious spot, if nobody saw you do it, it's like,
yeah. It's not a surprise.
Yeah.
All right. I think that's it for this week. Thanks for watching. If you liked the video, give it a thumbs up. We would appreciate that. If you want to see more, click the subscribe button. And if you have any feedback, want to let us know topics you'd like us to cover, videos you want us to talk about, let us know in the comments. We'd love to hear from you.
Great.
Other than that, see you next week.
Great.